Hello, class, and welcome to week 5. We're a little bit over halfway through our course, and this week is going to be our third week into kind of the heart of this course, which is our groups. So hopefully, all have been having really great experiences during those first couple groups, and you're able to learn a lot more, whether you were leading or participating. So we're going to jump right into kind of the meat of this lecture today. We are going to be talking a little bit more about kind of the concepts brought out in the Cloud and Townsend text and look at kind of some of the different problems that might arise in a group with different group members. So I am going to use their topics as kind of a point of reference, and there might be a little bit of carryover between what my lecture is and what their texts talk about, but we're also going to take a little bit of a spin on it. So, crazy group members. I don't like the word crazy, but it feels a little crazy sometimes when some of these group members are a part of our groups. And so the first one is neediness. Okay. So for many participants in a group, this is their first experience trying anything therapeutic. So a lot of times people are recommended to groups before even individual therapy because it's just kind of an easy way to kind of get into therapy. So, maybe they found the group through a friend or a doctor or pastor or community bulletin board. But while it's a huge leap of faith and courage for them to show up, they're usually pretty uncertain about how a therapeutic group might operate. So the needy person kind of look a variety of different ways. This might be the person who seems to try at least to get a lot of time talking in the group. Maybe the person who doesn't seem to be able to maintain an others focus, like they're always kind of turning it back on themselves. Maybe this is the person who comes to group each week with another major crisis going on in their life, or they're the type of person who shows up early and stays late to kind of try to get more time in with the therapist or the group members. It's usually pretty easy to spot a needy person. So how to deal with a needy person. And the first thing really is empathy and compassion. Okay. So, usually, regardless of the reason behind why they're taking up so much space, is that there's usually something going on behind this behavior. And so to be able to explore that in a group setting is very therapeutic and very important, and kind of coming from them from a sense of empathy and compassion versus annoyance and just like, okay, speak your piece. Secondly, a way that you deal with a needy person is really being consistent in the structure of the group. So that might be revisiting the rules, maybe being more directive in terms of kind of the expectations of the group or how the conversation looks. So you might ask specific people to talk or to share, or you might call different people out rather than opening it up for the group. You might use a timer for people to talk. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but sometimes if you've got a lot of needy people in a group who all really want to talk, that can be really effective. As an example, y'all know that I used to do in-home family therapy, and I had a mother. I remember this one time. Precious lady, but she didn't have a driver's license. She wasn't able to really get out of her house much. And so she would sit at home all day smoking cigarette after cigarette after cigarette, watching talk shows, all those sorts of things. And so when her daughter was required to have an in-home therapist for some behavioral issues, mom just loved it because it meant there was an adult that was coming into the home 3 times a week and she could talk to them. And so what I started to notice, as much as she really did need help, is that she loved to just drag the conversation on and on and on. And part of the company policy is that we really were supposed to stay kind of as long as the client needed us to, which is a whole other issue of self-care. But I found myself staying there an hour and a half, 2, sometimes 3 hours. And so what I started to do is take a timer with, and clinical hours, 45 to 50 minutes. I knew from my experience with her that when I would say, okay, it's time to leave, that it would take me about a half an hour to get through the door. So what I told her is, I'm going to set a timer, and once the timer goes off, that's my cue that we need to start wrapping up, knowing that the wrap up would take about 30 minutes. So I would set the timer for 30 minutes. She would hear it go off, and then she would start to wrap things up. And it worked. And so sometimes, when you face a needy person, you just have to kind of be really creative in making sure that everybody gets the space to talk. Dealing with a needy person, bring the group into the process. So sometimes that's through reflection, like after the needy person has talked, or a reflection of another group member's reaction. So maybe it's an eye roll or something like that, and asking them, okay, hey, I noticed when Mary started speaking, John, you kind of threw your head back and, did an eye roll and whatever. Tell me a little bit about that. Or it might even be a reflective confrontation. So, John, what's it like for you when you get done sharing and Sue jumps in with her own story? Or you could turn the confrontation around and, Sue, I'm wondering if you can reflect a bit on what John is saying rather than sharing your own story at this moment. So sometimes really kind of bringing that into the group process, they might not even know that that's what they're doing. Another thing, and this is kind of something that you have to be a little bit careful with, but at times, if you have people who are really, really needy, referring them to an individual therapist might not be a bad idea. You do need to be cautious about this because sometimes the experience of a group really can be exactly what that person needs and what the group needs in order to, learn how to interact with people in a safe manner. But sometimes that can be really overwhelming to a person or to a group and really unhelpful to the group, and they might function better with individualized care. So you could offer this as a therapist. If I have a group and there's somebody that I'm noticing that this is maybe something that they can't seem to shake, I might offer for them to start coming to me for an individualized therapy, or potentially, referring them out to somebody else. So those are just kind of things to keep in mind, that is absolutely a possibility. So that's a couple of thoughts on how to deal with a needy person. The non-compliant person. So this is somebody very easy to spot. These are the people that show up late, they leave early, they're not really consistent in their attendance. They really don't appear to value the group rules. They might interrupt others or talk about inappropriate issues to kind of deviate the conversation in untherapeutic ways. Potentially they even laugh at others, disrespectful, those sorts of things. The difference between a non-compliant person and an aggressive person is that oftentimes, and we'll talk a little bit more about an aggressive person, oftentimes an aggressive person is very intentional in what they're doing, and they're very aware this is what's going on. Sometimes a non-compliant person, it really can come from a space of unawareness, and if brought to attention is very easily remedied. So in this case, you might consider, like, if a person is consistently showing up late or leaving early, ask the group with that member present, to respectfully share how they experience how they experience the group members' inconsistency or lack of consideration for time or something like that. Oftentimes, if the other person is aware of this, they'll recognize that their actions have an impact and they seek to change that. The other thing that you can do is really discuss this with the individual and kind of let them know where you're coming from. As an example, this is not a group example, but this is an individualized example. I have a precious client who I've been working with for quite some time and has made incredible progress. But in the time that I have been seeing her, I kid you not, she has been on time once. And when I talk about on time, I'm not meaning a couple of minutes late. I'm talking like she's about 10 to 15 minutes late every single time except for that one time. She does great therapeutic work, but she's missing 10, 15 minutes of her session because she's consistently running late, and then she has a pattern because she runs out of time so fast of bringing something really emotional within like the last 5 minutes of the session. And so my job then as the therapist is to address this with them in session. It's something that I let her know that it's not caring for herself and giving her the time that she needs and prioritizing the time that she needs to work on these issues. It's disrespectful to me because I've set this time for her, and to ask me to go over is being disrespectful of my own needs, to be able to get work done in between sessions, to maybe use the bathroom, those sorts of things. And it's disrespectful to the next person coming in, because then they're shortchanged, maybe from their time, or I'm maybe frazzled getting into the session, or I haven't had time to kind of leave the last session and enter the next session. And so this is something that we've addressed then. And really, what I found is that people who are kind of unaware, this is just kind of how they operate with life, are usually very open to fixing those sorts of things. But really, the most important person with most important part of with a non-compliant client, whether they are aware or they're not aware, is to be consistent in maintaining and implementing the rules. And that one's on me. That one's on you as the group leader. So there are other occasions though where like non-compliance does not stem from unawareness, but rather behavioral patterns, habits, general disregard for others. So in those cases, a couple things you might consider again is calling the behavior out in the group when it happens. That might mean that you revisit the rules. You might talk about specifically basic respectful communication, but calling it out in the group is very appropriate. As the therapist, you might reflect to the group what you notice happens when that behavior occurs. So you might, if somebody's disrespectful or somebody's showing up late, you might as a therapist go, group members, I've noticed that when John shows up late, there's a sense of tension that enters into the group. And I'm just wondering, do you guys sense that too? That's a great thing to be very therapeutic about, and bringing that up in the group. If the behavior happens a few times, again, you can reflect on it with the group. This is a little bit different than calling it out in the group, in the sense that you're looking for feedback. Calling it out might just be going, hey, we're noticing this, whereas reflecting is talking about what is it that happens when this behavior occurs. Ask the group members what it's like to experience somebody else always being late or interrupting or leaving early, failing to show up. That can be a really therapeutic process. A lot of times people aren't asked to share what's going on with them when somebody else acts in a way that is potentially disrespectful. So getting people to own their thoughts and feelings and learn how to communicate them in a respectful manner with ownership is really important. And of course, if the behavior is repetitive, you might need to request to talk to this group member outside of the group and either discuss the group rules or suggest that maybe a different form of therapy or a different time for therapy might be a better forum. So it might just be that they're not ready to engage in a group like that, and that's okay. And so letting them know that potentially, maybe their consistent lateness is a reflection that this is just not the place that they're at in their own journey. So maybe a different time would work better. We'll move on to the passive person. So again, this is another person that's very easy to spot based off of their reactions. Perhaps they're quiet or they don't speak up. Maybe they just stay on the surface. They don't go deeper as the group becomes a little bit more established, or potentially they just don't speak at all. Like many other problems within a group with different group members, passivity is oftentimes a defense mechanism for something much deeper going on. It could be a fear of being vulnerable, a fear of connecting, fear of rejection, maybe a fear of being honest about their situation, and being unsure, like if they would be able to deal with the reality, or maybe they've never had an opportunity to speak up and be themselves and talk about what's going on. And sometimes that passivity can be a form of manipulation or seduction, or somebody needing to rescue them. Sometimes people use silence by brushing off passivity, or brushing off or being passive to gain attention, to have people ask them, oh, what's wrong, or to overextend care and support. So again, I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but one of the most important things that you can do as a therapist in this with this type of person is really to call out what you see going on and how it's impacting the group. So, John, I'm really noticing that it's really difficult for you to talk about emotions, and I watch you use your humor and your sarcasm as a way of not having to go deep. But each time that happens, it seems that the other group members also start to feel really hesitant to share about themselves. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that. And give this person a chance to respond. See, the thing is, when you confront in an empathetic and loving way, it really gives a person the opportunity to reflect on what's going on and respond without getting defensive. And that's really the purpose of a therapeutic group. So I'm going to pause the video right here, and then we'll continue going over a couple other characteristics of different group members.